the most famous family in the world. With no shortage of drama, the British royals have found themselves the subject of intrigue for millions. Now in his new book, ABC News royal contributor Omid Scobie is pulling back the curtain in Endgame inside the royal family and the monarchy's fight for survival. Omid, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here in the studio.
Good to have you in person. So you write that this really could be the family in crisis and potentially the endgame. I mean, would there be at all a situation where the monarchy as we know it ceases to exist?
Yeah, I'm glad you used that term, as we know it, because I think a lot of people think that I'm declaring the end of the royal institution. Listen, it's so deeply embedded into the foundations and every facet of British life that dismantling that would be a mammoth task. But I think we have reached this pinnacle moment where, after the death of the Queen, more people are having conversations about the relevancy, the purpose of the royal family. But also, you know, the passing of the Queen, the late Queen, reminded us of how she skillfully upheld the values, the morals, the ethics and the principles that we expected from a firm and institution at the head of our country that represents Britain on the world stage, those famous British family values on display. And you know, I really wanted this book to question and look into whether the current working royals and all the events that we've seen in recent years also uphold those same principles, or are there things that need to change in order to solidify that positive future for the firm?
You also detail years later the fallout that continues from that bombshell moment in Oprah's famous interview with Meghan Markle, where it's brought up that there was a member of the royal family who had concerns about the color of the baby's skin. What was the family's reaction to that?
Yeah. You know, I think we spent so long talking about that bombshell piece of information that Harry and Meghan brought up, but I wanted to go a little deeper than that. Firstly, I wanted to know why we haven't heard about it since. Harry and Meghan have done a Netflix series, Harry did a memoir, and we didn't hear those allegations brought up. I realised that this was considered or classed as a private family matter. We sort of remember that Recollections May Vary statement from the palace, but ultimately this is an establishment that should be representative for every member of British society. And what was more worrying was to discover that there were two family members at the heart of that conversation. So it still remains unresolved.
The Daily Mail, though, is reporting that in a Dutch version, it names King Charles as being at least one of those people who raised concerns about the skin color. I'm curious if you have any understanding of how that happened, this misnomer, and also the context of the conversation.
Yeah. You know, this translation error that you refer to is an incident that happened just hours before being here in the studio, and as I'm aware that it's being dealt with by the Dutch publisher. You know, I wrote this book in English, I edited it in English, and it's been published in the US and UK by HarperCollins. And, you know, for us, there were no names in the manuscript.
Even if you knew, you would not be able to, and you do know, but you're not.
I know, yeah.
But you would not be able to publish it in the book, correct?
The laws in the UK require for one to be able to show and tell. I can tell, but I can't present those letters. They're not mine. So the power really lies in Harry and Meghan's hands.
You've been accused of being a mouthpiece for the Sussexes. How do you respond to that criticism?
I think with me, it's always been this kind of like lazy way of delegitimizing what I have to say by just assuming that this comes from the mouths of Harry and Meghan. I have never in my life sat with Meghan in a room and had an interview, a private conversation, exchanged notes. None of this stuff is true.
Lastly, obviously, we're well aware of the rift between the princes, Harry and William. Where does their relationship stand today?
Yeah, you know, the release of Harry's memoir, Spare, was almost a year ago now, and I didn't want this book to kind of retread the stories that Harry had told us, but I did want to pick up where it left off. You know, he sat down on GMA and spoke about how he wanted conversations with his family to reconcile after accountability and apologies have taken place. None of that has happened, particularly between himself and William. I know through sources he had someone, a mutual friend, reach out to his brother to see if they could facilitate some kind of conversation a few months after the release of his book. to this day, that still hasn't happened.
Omid Scobie, always a pleasure to talk with you. Want to let our viewers know Endgame Inside the Royal Family and the Monarchy's Fight for Survival is now available wherever books are sold. We should mention both Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace declined to comment on Scobie's book to ABC News. We also reached out to the Sussexes for comment as well.